You thought her touch meant surrender, but it was a leash woven in silk. She didn't ask for your soul, she mirrored it, just long enough for you to hand it over willingly. The curve of her smile, the softness of her voice, the illusion of intimacy, all of it designed not to hold you, but to unman you without your noticing. You mistook submission for connection, but there was no connection. There was choreography, and you were never the one leading. You were chosen because you would yield. You were praised because you stayed predictable. You were loved in the way a falconer loves his bird as long as the claw stays sheathed, the wings folded. Her affection, a cage she called freedom. Her vulnerability, a weapon she made you polish. If this whisper already knows, you let it echo. Like the video. Leave your shadow in the comments. Subscribe and stay near the silence. You'll need it. Now watch as we tear the veil. She doesn't want freedom from the man, she wants control over the illusion of his power. You thought she admired your strength, that the way she leaned in closer when you spoke, the way her eyes widened at your ideas, the way her laughter curved around your presence, all of it meant you were becoming her anchor. But it wasn't admiration, it was measurement. She was not falling into orbit around you. She was calculating the diameter of your sun, how hot it burned, how close she could stand without being scorched, and most of all, how to dim you without putting out the light. She did not want to destroy you, she wanted to direct you. You were never meant to collapse, you were meant to shine only where she pointed. Your rage was a dragon she pretended to soothe, only so she could keep it in the cave, and the moment you called it love, she called it success. There was a time she praised your ambition. Remember that when she said it inspired her, that was the rehearsal. The stage light adoration before the curtains fell. Because once you burned too bright, once your independence dared to grow beyond her narrative, the praise turned cold. Suddenly your drive became selfish, your solitude became avoidance, your decisions became accusations. You did not become less, you became unmanageable. That is what she feared, not your cruelty, not your failure, your refusal to be directed. She doesn't want freedom. She wants the freedom to shape you to wear your strength like borrowed silk. The way you opened doors, took the lead, protected her from cold winds, all of it was charming, until it interfered with her secret empire. Because she doesn't want to dismantle power. She wants to own the man who holds it. That's why she chose you, not for who you are, but for what she could steer. You mistake this for love because it flatters the deepest ache in you to be seen and needed. She stokes that ache like a fireplace, just enough heat, just enough awe, but always conditional, always controlled. She doesn't need to chain you to the bed. She chains your identity by convincing you she's your mirror, that her needs are your needs, that her pain is your problem, and that your masculinity is safe in her approval. But it's not approval, it's domestication. She calls you her rock, but she erodes you with soft hands, one comment at a time, one raised eyebrow, one sigh when your eyes look elsewhere. You begin to hesitate. You begin to check yourself. Not because you fear hurting her, but because you've been trained like a guard dog muzzled with velvet. Every moment you express your own rhythm. You see her eyes flicker, disappointment dressed as fragility, disapproval disguised as a wound. You feel guilty when she's silent. You feel responsible when she cries. And you call this connection? No. This is obedience purchased through guilt. You don't speak your truth, you translate it into what she won't punish. That's not love. That's emotional surveillance. Do you remember when you stopped leading, not physically, but spiritually? When you began asking for permission with your eyes, long before words were needed? When your certainty became negotiable? When you learned how to soften your opinions, bury your needs, mask your instincts for the sake of peace? But it wasn't peace. It was mutiny. A slow theft of your essence. She praised your masculinity just long enough for you to surrender it. Now she curates you like furniture, strong but silent, present but pliable, decorative dominance. The illusion of a man who still roars but only inside a cage she designed. There is no hatred here, no evil, just an ancient transaction masquerading as modern romance. A pact made in the shadows. You give her control. She gives you meaning, but the price is steep, because every time you comply to keep her love, you teach yourself to fear your own spine. You begin to apologize without knowing why. You nod when you don't agree. You adapt. Even when it feels like betrayal, you call it compromise. But it's corrosion. She doesn't ask you to kneel. She simply builds the room so low you must bend to enter. And because the ceiling is soft, you don't notice the cost. The silk leash is invisible not because it's hidden, but because it flatters you. It lets you believe you're still choosing, that you're still in charge, that your protection is needed. But the leash always leads back to her hand, not with force, with softness. She doesn't demand your compliance. She makes you feel noble for offering it. And in your moments of doubt, she will remind you how much she loves you. She will cry and say, "I just want us to be close again." But intimacy, for her, was never about merging. It was about managing. She doesn't want to dissolve into you. She wants to edit you. And your deepest pain, the one you carry like a secret stone, is that you let her. You let her because you mistook her desire for devotion. You let her because you wanted to be needed more than you wanted to be free. You let her because you thought being softened made you evolved. But what it made you was silent. And here you are, a lion in a library. All your teeth tucked behind polite smiles. All your instincts filed under too much. You wear your love like armor, but the enemy is already inside the walls. And she's not swinging a sword. She's writing the rules, with your permission. So what will you do? You cannot ask her to return what she never believed was yours. You cannot rage your way back into leadership that will only prove her point. You must wake, not with noise, but with truth. Cold, blinding, self-owned truth. The kind that says, "I see the leash now, and I will not wear silk to sleep through my own life." But you won't say it aloud, not yet. You'll feel it first, in your bones, in the way your spine straightens, in the silence that no longer fears her reaction, in the way your eyes no longer ask permission. If this part of you still breathes, let him wake. Let him ruin the script. Let him become the man she cannot control, and therefore must finally meet, because the silk leash only binds what chooses to bend. The warmth you felt wasn't intimacy, it was reconnaissance. She maps your ego before she severs it. She doesn't rush, she waits. Because a woman trained in shadows knows that your defense is not at the door, it's in your pride. So she flatters it, not to nurture you, but to measure every glance she gives you, every laugh at your mediocre joke, every moment she looks at you like no man has ever existed. It isn't love, it's data. She learns your rhythms the way a hunter studies wind. She learns when you're weakest, not when you cry, but when you believe you're adored. You think you're seen. What you are is outlined, sketched by her eyes in real time, like a map of soft spots drawn in lipstick. She compliments what you most fear isn't real. She echoes back what you secretly crave to hear. You're different. You're so strong. No one understands me like you do. Words like silk on steel, and you fall not because you're blind, but because you want the lie to be true. And so you tell her everything. You reveal your history like a man proud of his scars. But she doesn't look away, not because she's kind, but because she's cataloging. Pain is her access point. Guilt is her instrument. The moment you think, she would never use that against me, you've already disarmed yourself. You were not seduced, you were profiled, and what happens next always feels like coincidence. One day she's gentle, the next she's withdrawn. 1 week you're everything, the next she's quiet when you walk in the room. But it's not mood, it's strategy. Now she applies pressure, now she tightens the net. She won't scream, not yet. She'll simply look at you like you failed a test you didn't know you were taking. And you'll panic. You'll start over-explaining. You'll start performing. You'll betray your own center just to see her smile again. That's the strike, the first real one. And it doesn't come with violence. It comes with vacancy. The warmth is withdrawn. And you, already trained to need it, chase it like oxygen. But what you don't see is that the game has changed. You're no longer the admired, you are the apprentice. And your curriculum is obedience. She reintroduces herself, slowly, in the form of correction. Not open correction, subtle. A comment about your tone. A raised eyebrow when you speak with too much certainty. You didn't mean it like that. Right, she says, and suddenly you're backtracking, not because you were wrong, but because you don't want to lose the approval. That's the strike. She's not punishing you, she's teaching you to pre-censor, because a man who edits himself is already hers. You start rehearsing your reactions. You walk on eggshells made of silk, not because she threatens, but because she once gave you paradise and you can't stand the chill of her cold shoulder. This is not emotional volatility. This is orchestration. She lets you live in warmth just long enough to make you feel the cold as punishment, even when she says nothing at all. She smiles, still, but it's not the smile of admiration. It's the smile of the chess player who knows your king has already been cornered. You just haven't noticed. You think you're still in the game. You think love is just going through a season. But this isn't weather. This is war disguised as climate. You think you're equals because she once told you so. But now, you're adjusting and you don't know why. You blame yourself. That's the most brilliant part. The strike is so smooth, so quiet. You think it was you who misstepped. You apologize for emotions you never expressed. You shrink for crimes you never committed. You call this maturity. She calls it success. There is no dramatic confrontation, no broken plates, just soft silences that make you feel responsible. She doesn't need to shout. Your guilt does it for her. And every time she looks away with those wounded eyes, you sharpen your own blade. She taught you how to bleed without noise. You used to be decisive. Now, you consult her expression before you speak. You used to dream aloud. Now you edit your ambitions to fit her version of you, the one who doesn't challenge her, doesn't threaten her emotional monopoly. The version that asks before acting, that waits before claiming. She wanted a man, but she keeps the man on a leash made of his own need to be loved. You remember her hands, don't you? How gentle they were, how safe you felt in her arms. That wasn't sanctuary. That was reconnaissance. The deeper she pulled you in, the clearer she saw your blueprint. She studied the child inside you, the one who longed to be worthy. And she became mother, muse, and mirror until you forgot how to breathe without her permission. You think this is just what love is, that this is growth, that bending is part of bonding. But listen closely, this isn't union. This is erosion. Your edges have been rounded. Your voice has been softened. Your instincts have been labeled problematic. And every time you sense it, every time something deep in your body says something is off, she offers just enough softness to reset you. One smile, one tear, one "I'm just tired," and you reset, just like that. She never wanted you to be weak. She just wanted you to be dependent. She didn't want your submission, she wanted your self-censorship. Because that kind of control doesn't look like domination. It looks like love. It looks like care. It looks like you becoming the man she can tolerate instead of the man you truly are. Now you walk around her like a prayer hoping to be answered. You make offerings in the form of restraint. You've convinced yourself that being less of you makes you more of a partner. But deep down, you know this isn't partnership. This is performance. And the most terrifying truth you were warned. Not in words. In the gut twists. In the quiet humiliation of not being heard. In the soft rebukes when your fire burned too bright. But you overrode them, because the idea of her, the promise of her, was louder than your instincts. So now, you exist in between, not quite yourself, not quite hers, just a man in a slow dissolve. And she smiles not because she won, but because you no longer realize you lost. That's the strike. That's the kill. Not death. Disappearance. Connection was never the goal. She offered softness only to tame, not to merge. You called it closeness, but it was confinement wrapped in comfort. There were no bars, no locks, just shared secrets, entwined routines, soft blankets draped across evenings spent in silence. You mistook the gentleness for safety, the predictability for devotion. But what she offered you was not intimacy, it was enclosure. Intimacy is dangerous. It requires surrender without condition. But she was never surrendering. She was observing, adjusting, calibrating your world until the only map that mattered was the one she drew. At first, it felt sacred. The way she touched you like she knew you before you were born. The way she listened or pretended to with such intensity that even your confusion felt holy. But the holiness was a trick of the candlelight. She didn't love you as you are. She loved the access. The access to what? To your interior. To the gears that turn when no one's watching. She asked about your childhood not to understand you but to engineer you. And you let her, because it felt like someone finally cared enough to know what broke you. But what she built was not a bridge between two souls. It was a labyrinth designed to ensure she was always at the center. She cloaked herself in your wounds, wore your pain like perfume. When you hurt, she comforted, but it wasn't compassion, it was control, because now she knew the levers, and all she had to do was whisper, "Are you okay?" in just the right tone to bring you to your knees. She doesn't want to be inside your mind. She wants to redecorate it. She paints over your solitude, your ambition, your stillness. Suddenly, what once gave you peace now makes you feel distant. What once felt natural now feels selfish. Your rituals are labeled walls. Your silence becomes a threat. And so you begin to reshape, not because she asked, but because you fear losing that warm gaze. You fear becoming cold. You fear hearing the words you've changed. You haven't changed. You've vanished. What she called intimacy was simply access on her terms. She wanted your soul, but only if she could edit the sentences. Every time you brought your raw self, she winced. Not outwardly, not in cruelty, in subtle shifts in how long it took to respond, in how her breath caught when you said something unfiltered. And you learned. Like a child burned by a stove. You learned what versions of yourself were acceptable in her temple. She didn't demand a different you. She preferred him. And preference is the most potent prison because you still believe you have a choice. You share a bed, but not a home. A ritual, but not a merging, because in true intimacy, there are no roles. But in her world, you must play your part. The part of the man who gets it, the emotionally intelligent man, the supportive man, the man who knows when to shut down his fire because the air is too thin for both of you to breathe. You think she wants connection. No, she wants to avoid loneliness. There's a difference. Connection would require her to undress too, and she never did. She offered echoes, reflections, mirroring your depth just enough to keep you diving. But the bottom was never reachable. Every time you thought you found her core, it shifted. Every time you asked, "Where are you in all of this?" she cried, or blamed, or withdrew. That wasn't vulnerability. That was evasion. And still, you stayed. Because you had already offered too much. Because the cage was lined with velvet. Because she cried during the storm and kissed you during the calm. Because she gave you pieces not to satisfy, but to tether. Her tears weren't about resolution. They were about reinforcement. The moment you threatened the narrative, the moment you pulled away, the tears returned. And you mistook them for truth. They weren't truth. They were anchors. She blurred the lines between care and capture. She said things like, "I just want to understand you, as long as your answers fit within the frame." The moment you said something raw, like, "I need space," her face darkened. She didn't punish you. She became disappointed. And that disappointment, it wrapped tighter than chains. So you adjusted again. 1,000 small adjustments until you were unrecognizable, until you stopped thinking of what you wanted, until your first instinct was not action, but analysis. How will she feel if I do this? Will she feel left out? Will she be okay if I need a night alone? That's not intimacy, that's compliance. And she never said, "Don't be yourself." She just stopped responding when you were. She never said, "Obey me." She just became cold when you didn't. And you, starved for connection, kept giving, hoping one day the real you would be enough again. But it never was, because the real you was never the target, only the version she could manage. She did not fall in love with your soul. She fell in love with your potential to be manageable, moldable, hers. She never wanted to meet you. She wanted to use you not materially, but spiritually. You were a cathedral to worship her reflection, and when your altar cracked, she said you were unstable. You are not unstable. You are awakening, and this awakening is brutal, because it doesn't come with anger. It comes with grief. Grief for the parts of you that were amputated so subtly you didn't even notice the bleeding. Grief for the man you could have been if you hadn't mistaken her comfort for love. Grief for the years you spent calling a cage a home. But grief is holy. It is the first language of freedom. Let it come, because the moment you see the cage, truly see it, you cannot unsee. You cannot pretend the silence was sacred when it was self-erasure. You cannot call it love when it was always editing. You may still love her, but you no longer serve her script. You will speak again, loudly or in stillness, and she will not know how to receive it. She will call it cold or distant or wrong, but it won't matter, because now you know her intimacy was never an invitation. It was a test, and you finally have stopped trying to pass. There is a room where you still kneel, not in devotion, but out of memory. The walls shimmer with shadows that speak in her voice, even though she is long gone. Not physically, spiritually. She disappeared the moment you stopped mirroring, and yet her gaze lingers, embedded in the glass, watching, waiting. The chair across from you is empty, but you still measure your breath like she's listening. You still apologize in your posture, still hesitate before speaking aloud. Even now in her absence, you adjust your spine to the curvature of a leash that was never physical. You wonder if you were ever held or only handled. You rise, not for revenge, not for righteousness, but because something deeper than dignity stirs. The silence no longer hurts. It listens, and somewhere, faintly, the sound of keys dropping from the inside of the cage.